All right, so Matthew chapter 13, starting in verse 1. We've got a lot of parables to get through this morning, so we're going to have to try and book it a little bit. I will say, I've talked to other preachers who have had a similar experience, so that makes me feel better that it's not just me. But it always seems like it's a great idea. Like, I should teach a whole quarter class on the parables. That'll be such a rich study. And you're like, yeah, that's going to be wonderful. And then you start teaching the class and you realize, on the one hand, how do I fill up an entire class with one parable? Because the lesson is so plain and simple, and it's a simple application. And on the other hand, I have no idea what this parable's about. So do I give the simple explanation, or do I muddle through for 45 minutes about how much I don't understand? And I feel like Jesus' teaching as a whole are kind of like that there are these clear points, these things that we can glean from them, and yet there's also this kind of enigmatic nature of everything that he said. You start looking at the context and who he says it to and what he's talking about, and you just kind of get a little bit flustered maybe. And he addresses that here pretty quick within this chapter. And so let's jump in Matthew chapter 13. Proverbs was Wednesday night. Matthew 13, verse 1. That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea, and great crowds gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat down. And the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying. So before we get into the parable, an interesting kind of note to me. My understanding is that around the Sea of Galilee and some of these places, there would be a kind of a natural slope down to the sea. So if you're in a boat and you're speaking out, that it echoes, so it projects almost like an amphitheater, which is pretty fascinating. But there's something to me that's kind of amazing. Romanticized or something, I don't know, of how common, right? Like, Jesus is not in Athens, right? In this like beautiful laid out place. He's not in the middle of a town or a city speaking in front of a crowd in an auditorium. He's just outside, and he just found a place where a lot of people could hear him, and he just talked from the boat. There's something that's so common about that I think speaks to the very nature of Jesus and his kingdom, that he didn't go to all these other places first. He wasn't in Jerusalem from the beginning. He wasn't teaching. He's just talking to people outside because that's where they were. And I think there's something kind of interesting about that. Anyway, so he's there on the beach. They're on the beach. He's in the boat. He's speaking to him. And he says in these parables, starting with, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. Now, we're very familiar with the parable of the sower, I think. But imagine for a moment, you're one of these people that's been following Jesus around, or have heard of his ability to heal, and you've gone and you maybe been healed yourself, been fed, I don't know. And you know that something special is happening, right? Like, clearly this is different. This is some kind of different prophet. And you're eager to hear him speak. And you're gathered around with all these people, and you're on the bank of the sea, and he gets in the boat, and he's going to preach. And you're like, what is he going to say? You know, what do you think you're going to hear in this moment? Like, this is the guy who can cure any disease and make food multiply, who has some kind of amazing power. What is he going to say? And I don't know what I would expect. I don't know if I would expect him to like tell us that we need to overthrow the Romans, right? Some sort of like political movement. I don't know what I would expect. But I can tell you, I would not expect this story. He just starts talking about a sower and the ground, and you're like, what on earth are you doing? And this isn't like a preacher analogy, right? Where I get up and I say this analogy about whatever it is, and then I say, and then explain it right away. He just tells it. And the disciples come up to him and they're like, Jesus, why'd you tell this parable? Like, what does this mean? I don't understand. And his answer is, To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to the one who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. This is why I speak in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. Indeed, in their case, the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled that says, you will indeed hear but never understand. You will indeed see but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it. Let's say you're Philip. Let's pick a random apostle. And you hear the parable of the sower, and you go up to Jesus and you're like, I don't understand this parable. What are you doing? And you get this response from him. Does this make, like if you're Philip, you're like, oh, yeah, I get it. What do you all make of this response from Jesus? Here he is teaching in parables. You want to know why you're teaching in parables. He quotes Isaiah, talks about how the people are going to be judged in Isaiah because they don't understand and they haven't responded to God. And he says, you all understand. It's been given to you to know the kingdom of heaven, but to them it hasn't. What do you all make of this? Yeah.
It's almost reminiscent of a lot of conversations I had with my dad. You know, he would tell me something, and I was like, yeah, I don't get it. He was like, oh, you will. You're going to understand.
Yeah.
And it's, you got to reflect on it. You got to think about it. I think it's uncanny how he talks in a parable and even tells them, hey, this is what's going on. And it's still so far out of reach. They still don't get it. But he doesn't stop. Drags out another. You know, he puts it fun. Let's practice a little. You know, let me give you another paragraph. And he doesn't stop to pick them up and take them where he's going. They have to come to him and understand what he's talking about.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Why does he do it that way? Yeah. Who does God want us to be as his people? Does he want us to be strict rule followers who follow the rule book that he's given to life? I mean, yeah, right? He wants us to live a certain way, but he wants us to understand the rules. He wants us to understand why they were written. It's like, have you ever tried to explain a sport to somebody that doesn't understand the sport? Football's probably a good example because there's a billion rules and they throw a flag all the time. We were at a hockey game the other day. Hockey, it's so fast-paced, and the announcers don't have time over the PA to say what's going on half the time, so you're like, I don't understand what that call was. And then they'll say like icing, and you're like, well, I've never heard of icing. I don't know what the ice has to do with what's going on, right? So you're watching a sport for the first time, you kind of have a grasp of it, but you're like, I don't really understand the nuance. Or you watch a sport like soccer, and you're like, why do they have offsides? All it does is make the game boring, right? Whatever it is. But maybe you get to a point where you understand the sport more, and you understand why the rules have evolved the way that they have, right? Why it's such a big deal that you can only have so many people actually on the line of scrimmage in football because it gives the offense some sort of advantage or whatever it is, right? All these detailed, nitpicky rules exist for a reason. It didn't start that way, but they added them in because it became more and more problematic. And my point in all that is to say, what Jesus is doing, I think, is he doesn't just want us to say, you have to be this certain way and you have to do these things. He wants us to understand what matters. And so he talks in parables and he gives illustrations so that we think about them and we dwell on them and we chew on them. And if we spend time understanding the character of God and thinking about these things, they become richer and more valuable, and we become more thoughtful. I mean, I've done this before, but just think about the writings of Paul. What does Paul say over and over and over again? He says you have to think like God. He says, have this mind in you which was in Christ Jesus. Bring every thought captive to the cause of Christ. Set your mind on the things above. Don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Time and again, he says, you need to be thoughtful and have a mind that is like Jesus. You need to think like him. And the whole thing about the gospel and the way that it's written and the parables and all of this isn't just to tell us what we need to do. It's to bring us along so that we understand. The reason why we have hundreds of years of the kings of Israel and Judah, floundering in wickedness, isn't so that we can learn from them necessarily. It's so we can learn how God dealt with them. We have the prophets and God's commentary on what's going on, how the mistakes that they made, what the point that they missed. And all of that is creating a picture of who God is. And so when Jesus comes and he teaches, to just tell people what they're supposed to do isn't really going to accomplish what he wants it to accomplish. He wants us to think like him, to understand the world the way that he does. And here's the fascinating thing with the parable of the sower and the parable of the wheat and the tares and all these other things that he uses, these other analogies. They are things that are embedded in nature, that are fundamental. It's like when John talks about the light and the darkness in John chapter 1. Why is that a relevant analogy? Because it speaks to the wisdom of God that he implanted within the world. And what God is teaching us is consistent with the world that he created. And so all of this builds up an image and an idea of who God is, and it's consistent of his character all the way through. And he wants us to understand that and to think about it and to be thoughtful about it. And so, he teaches in parables. And by the way, part of the side consequence of that is people don't want to listen, they don't have to. I'm not going to force them. I'm going to give them every opportunity, and I want them to. But if you want to look at this and ignore it and pretend like you don't understand, that's fine. Go ahead. But the evidence and what you need is here. And it's founded even in nature. Yeah, Rick.
Better understand what the law was meant to do. There's always a spiritual side of those things. And it's kind of like God gave us a mind to follow him. Okay? He didn't give it just so that we can deal with the world and so on, but he gave it to us so that we can be appropriate servants and understand beyond the written word what's just there, to understand principles of life, understand his teaching.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I would add, it's not just the apostles and the disciples then that were literalists. We are too. Look, we are constantly fighting that same sort of temptation, aren't we? That we want to have our rule book. I mean, you look at denominations and different religious groups, the Catholic Church, they have their rule book, right? They have years and years of their doctrine in which they've parsed through the theology of the Bible and they've written it all down. And that's a constant struggle that we have. And if we're honest, we have our unwritten almost sorts of things that it's easy for us to fall back on if we're not careful, as opposed to absorbing God's word and the Bible and thoughtfully pursuing him, which leads to certain conclusions. It is easy to write down and say, well, this is the stuff in between this passage and this passage. This is what we need to understand, right? We need to write some more books on the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit that came up in chapter 12, right? We need to make sure we really pinpoint exactly what that means. And that's fine. Understand those things, pursue those things. The problem is when you do that at the cost of robbing ourselves of our heart and pursuing God, which is what Jesus wants us to have, that we are earnest and thoughtful in our pursuit of him. And the people who write those things down, they are being thoughtful, right? It's all that sort of stuff. The danger is that those things begin to replace this other attitude in which we are earnest and thoughtful in our pursuit of God. Hopefully that makes sense and is fair. But I think that's all part of this, that we are in pursuit of something and thoughtfully pursuing it, constantly thoughtfully pursuing it. And I think that the gospel's laid out and the parables are laid out to give us those challenges and those things to seek after. Yeah, Ian. Yeah, and it comes back to this idea of like faith and pursuit, right? What you're seeking after, and I think that's such a big deal. So as we kind of continue on, then he gives the explanation for the parable of the sower. So he says, "Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along in the path. As for what was sown on the rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfaithful. As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. Again, I think we're pretty familiar with the parable. The idea is that people are the seed, it gets scattered in them, and they're the soil, and wherever it scatters, there are the different dangers that may or may not allow the seed to grow and flourish, right? A couple points, though. Because I've heard parable of sower taught a lot. And sometimes it's from the perspective of we are the sower. Sometimes it's from like, which soil are you, right? Like that's the way that we should look at it. I think both are apropos under different circumstances to teach it that way. I will say, for those of us who wonder which soil we are, right? There's a simple test. When you heard the gospel and you received it, were you snatched away by the evil one like off the road? When the word was implanted and you received it joyfully, were you on rocky ground and did it burn out quickly and you leave? Were you the soil that's in the roots and the thorns and the thistles, and you got choked out by the cares and the worries of the world? Or are you a Christian? And do you try to bear good fruit in your life? And the reason why I say that is because it's easy to look at these parables and on the one hand, just assume that we are like Jesus throwing the seed. And on the other hand, it's really easy to look at it and challenge people and point a finger at them and say, make sure you're not the rocky ground, brethren, right? But I think for those of us that are here, I think it's reasonable to say everybody who's here this morning has endured something and is still here. I look around, I don't know all of you intimately well, but you're here. You're worshiping. So hopefully you're not any of those others. And maybe you're not bearing as much good fruit as you should. But he ends it with saying, the one who hears the word and understands it bears fruit and yields. Some yield 100-fold. Another 60, another 30. Your yield may not be as much as somebody else's, but are you yielding something from that? And I think that's kind of helpful too. And so I guess my way in kind of bringing that up and talking about that is maybe to be a little more comforting, because you want to know how you had the faith like Abraham. Have you endured the things that Abraham went through, right? Have you done the things that he did? Well, maybe not. So maybe you don't quite have the faith of Abraham, but you have your faith going through the things that you have endured, the cares, the troubles of the world that have tried to choke you out, the devil who tried to snatch it away from you at different times in your life. And so it's, take comfort in the fruit that you have borne and try to bear more. I don't know. Hopefully that's somewhat encouraging kind of take on that this morning. But then he gives them another parable. And this is maybe my favorite parable in the chapter. I've got a whole lesson on it. He says, he put another parable before them saying, verse 24, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? And he said to them, an enemy has done this. So the servants said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? He said, no, lest in gathering the weeds, you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at the harvest time, I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. He's going to come back in verse 36 to explain this. In fact, we'll jump to verse 36 and read the explanation and talk about that for a little bit, and then we'll go back to the parables in between. So verse 36, then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him saying, explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. And he answered, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. So here's the analogy, right? Farmer, master, grows his wheat. And you plant the wheat, and then the wheat starts to come up, and you realize that mixed in with the wheat, there's a bunch of weeds, a bunch of tares. And it's like, oh man, how'd the tares get in there? Did we put the wrong seed in? He says, no, an enemy did this. We had good seed. The problem isn't the seed. The problem is the enemy came and sowed the weed in. And they're like, well, let's rip it all out. Let's get rid of all those weeds. And the master says, no, we're not going to do that, because if you do that, you're going to rip up some of the roots and some of the wheat along with it. So we'll wait, we'll let it all grow together, and then at the end, we'll harvest it all, and then we'll separate it. Different ways to do that, I guess, but my understanding is that it's part of the threshing, right? You throw it all up in the air, and the wheat has heavier seeds, and it falls, and then the tares blow away in the wind. So you get to separate it all out that way, and you have the good grain, and the other stuff gets separated. So there's a way to do that, right, at the harvest. And Jesus says, this is what the end of the age is going to be like. I've planted my seed across the world, and the harvest time is the end of the age, and when the end of the age comes, we'll separate it out, right? And the weeds are going to be thrown into the fire, and the wheat and the good thing is going to be separated out. The righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father, right? And this is why I really like this parable. I was asked a couple summers ago to do a lesson actually up in Ocala during their summer series on when will the end come and what will it be like? And it just so happens I was the last person to pick my topic, so I got stuck with that one. It was not my choice. But when will the end come and what will it be like? Well, this is the parable I used about when will the end come. Because the point is, I don't know, right? We don't know when the end will come, but we do know, based on this parable, a principle that's pretty important. That God is not wishing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Right? He's not slack concerning his promises. He's patient. He's eager that all should be saved. And that's what this parable is about. And I think it speaks a pretty powerful truth about the character of God. And more specifically, it answers, at least in some way, one of the really hard questions that we all have as people. Anybody who's questioned the existence of God in any way, shape, or form has in some way or other asked this question. If God is good, and he is all-powerful, how would he ever allow something like the Holocaust? If God is good and he is all-powerful, why would he ever allow, and you pick your example, of whatever horrible atrocity sticks out to you most in your personal life or in history? And we all ask that question at some way, or time, or other. And it bothers us because it's a hard one, isn't it? And I think in some ways this parable answers that question. At what moment is somebody beyond saving? At what moment are they irredeemable? Now, we may have our answer in terms of our justice system, right? We have the death penalty. Certain things may qualify for the death penalty, and that may be our final straw, right? But for God, when is the moment that somebody is irredeemable? And so, we know that according to God, it seems to be his practice that all are redeemable, right? Up until the end. They have their full life, their full existence to come and serve him. So at what point would you want God to sacrifice a soul? At what point, because we play those kind of mental games, right? There's the debates, philosophy classes. Would you go back and kill a baby Hitler if you could time travel? Right? That's like the fun thing that people like to say. At what point do you take somebody's life because they're irredeemable? God's answer is pretty clear. He's going to wait till the end. He's going to wait till the final harvest, and that's when he's going to separate them out. And because of that, bad things happen in the meantime. And we struggle with it, and we wish that they didn't. But God's able to take care of those that are deceased, right? He's able to comfort those that have gone on before us. Death isn't the end to God the way that it is to us. And so, yeah, bad things happen. And he will redeem those who need to be redeemed. And he will resurrect those that are called to resurrection. And part of the consequence of that is that, yeah, bad things will happen and evil people will exist. And doesn't that say something pretty incredible about the character of God? I mean, go back and read the story of the flood. And there's a couple interesting things. One is that it says that when God looks down at the earth, he was sorry that he made man, which seems like a pretty big statement. And in fact, he was so sorry that he created man that he judged the whole earth with a flood except for Noah and his family. But the second thing that's really interesting is that after the flood, when he puts the rainbow in the sky, and it's the sign that he's not going to destroy the water with flood, with the world with a flood again. Do you know what he specifically says? He doesn't say so that you, Noah, can look at the rainbow and remember. That's not what he says. He says, I will put my bow in the sky so that when I see it, I will remember. It's a sign from God for God, is the way that he frames it, because of the cost of the sacrifice and the judgment that existed on the earth. And so when we talk about the end of the age, we talk about judgment, we talk about the character of God, it's important to think about it in terms of that last cataclysmic judgment that existed and the character that God has shown from that moment, from the beginning of time till now, and his desire that all should be saved. And we wonder, how long, O Lord, like the psalmist? And the answer is, as long as it takes. Because he's not going to lose a single soul that can be saved. It is a really, really hard thing to see the horrible world that we live in sometimes. And I guarantee you, it is hard for God to see the horrible world that we live in sometimes, that he has created. To see the way that his children argue and fight and murder each other. But he's not willing that any should perish. And this parable about the nature of the kingdom of heaven speaks so acutely to the character of God that I think it's worth dwelling on for a minute this morning. I know we've got to go through a lot of parables this morning, but this one sticks out to me. I think it's a big deal. I think it says something pretty powerful about the character of God. Something worth all of us considering. Any thoughts, comments about that? Yeah.
Soul matters. It matters to him. And I know he doesn't want anything bad to happen to me, so he set up some things that I wouldn't have a problem with. But I have to pay attention to those. And I have to be the one to try to exhibit the obedience to do that. And he will protect me. He will help me. This says that the wheat is more important than the tech.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And to kind of highlight that, notice how he finishes it. Verse 43, the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. And we live in Florida. I think we all can appreciate the sun shining. I think it's like become a thing now where people are skeptical that sunscreen is good. They're like, oh no, that's what causes the cancer. I've heard that a few times. I'm not a scientist. I don't know anything about sunscreen. I think that sounds crazy. As a lifetime Floridian, you can go outside on a sunny day and you can feel the sun destroying you. Like you are melting and you can feel it shriveling up. I've worked with enough roofers and outdoors people that have had cancer spots cut off their face and their ears and whatever to know that the sun is pretty brutal, right? I don't think that's what he means necessarily in terms of the radiation poisoning you get from the sun. But I do think what he's talking about is those moments in the morning, like when I'm driving the kids to school and the sun is rising, and with my sunglasses on and the sunshade out, I can't see the traffic light that's turning green. And you got to like squint through it because you don't want to hold the people up behind you. And there's something so bright and so powerful about that. Like there's nothing that equals that, is there? There's nothing that we know or that we see on a regular basis that has that kind of power. That every day rises in the sun with that warm glow that penetrates through into our cars and our houses. We have to have our AC and our sunshades up on the, side of the house so that we don't, burn up in the morning because it's so powerful. And think about that positively. But that's what he says those will be like. So you may suffer along with the tares, and you may see the tares growing alongside you, but in the end, he will take those, the wheat, and they will shine like the sun. And so there is this benefit for those that wait upon the Lord and have that kind of patience. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's a really easy thing that we do as people. My wife and I talk about this sometimes. She has a friend that has some flaws that are particularly annoying on occasion, right? And we all have those sorts of things, but some of them, I guess, poke other people a little bit more than they do some, or whatever, I don't know. But what's really difficult is when somebody has annoyed you, let's say 3, 4, 5 times. They have a couple of these personality traits that are kind of annoying. What becomes almost impossible as humans is to then interpret each interaction with them without those previous annoyances in mind, right? So you just assume that what they're doing is wrong because the other thing that they did was wrong and annoying. And so you just take that baggage into this new interaction with them. And we shouldn't do that. I mean, the fact is, just because they did this annoying thing before, it doesn't mean that that's what they're doing now. And so to objectively evaluate this interaction and whether or not they are still being annoying or not is practically impossible, right? Because we remember all those previous things that they did that were annoying. I had a guy who worked for me, and I don't think he was particularly trained very well. We brought him in from another department, and he made a mistake. And when he made the mistake, I get an email from the person who caught the mistake, really upset, and they copied my boss on it, and they talked about how big of a deal it was that he made this mistake. He didn't know what he was doing, all this sort of stuff, really upset. And I was like, well, did you tell him? And they were like, no. So I called the guy, and I explained to him the mistake, and he said, I didn't know that, right? He made another mistake, a different mistake, completely different. Same thing happens. And at this point now, everybody thinks that the guy is a problem. And it wasn't his fault. Nobody ever told him what was wrong. They didn't train him right. But now he's a problem because he made these mistakes. And I had to sit down and tell him, I said, look, man, it's not your fault. You weren't trained right, but you have to be aware that this is what's happening. And you need to make sure you tighten these things up and ask questions ahead of time because now they think that you're a problem. And they're not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. and he responded pretty well to that. He did a little bit better and was a little more careful, asked questions, those sorts of things. But it's heartbreaking to see because you can see it in real time. He's now labeled as a problem. We don't trust him. We're not going to give him any more work. We're not going to promote him because he's untrustworthy because of these two mistakes that were made, right? As opposed to calling him, explaining it to him. And can you imagine if God was like that? You make the mistake and he just condemns you for it? Doesn't give you the opportunity to be forgiven or to change? And so I think Derek's point's right. As we learn about the character of God, we need to reflect that as well. And whether it's somebody who's annoying or a mistake that somebody made, it's really easy for us to form an opinion about something and take that opinion into every interaction, as opposed to forgiving 7 times 70, right? It's really difficult. And we have to make concerted efforts to be that way. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's well said. And it kind of goes back a little bit to the parable of the sower in some ways, right? How do you know you're saved? You know, we debate those things. We want some sort of assurance. Sometimes the best assurance we have is, well, I'm still here. You know, I know that this happened and yet I'm still here. And I think that sometimes that's the assurance of our faith, that like, yeah, I'm not the rocky soil because I'm still here, you know. And it's the faith of Abraham thing, right? It is the persecutions, the difficulties, the challenges, the examples of faith that he showed over a lifetime. You know, the moment that he lifts the knife to kill Isaac, now he knows. Now God knows. Now everybody knows. Abraham believed that God could raise Isaac from the dead. To that extent. And that's pretty incredible, right? And it isn't until you're in that position to have the knife in your hand and raise it over your head that you know. Now, thankfully, God doesn't ask us to raise the knife over the, you know, like Abraham did. But each challenge, each difficulty is a moment in which we prove what we believe. And I think that gives us comfort and assurance, and I think that's invaluable. All right. I spent way too much time on that from a class management perspective, so I ask you all to forgive me. But let's blitz through a couple other things. Verse 31, going back to the mustard seed and the leaven. He put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till it was all leavened. All these things Jesus said to the crowds in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without a parable. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. I will open mouths in parables. I will utter what has been hidden since the foundation of the world. So I think the reason why those two parables are stuck in between the parable of the wheat and the tares and the explanation is because they all have this common thread, which is the patience that we should have within the kingdom. The mustard seed is this tiny thing, and it grows into this tree that all these birds live in, right? It takes time. That little tiny thing can grow into something magnificent, but it takes time. The leaven. It takes time to make good leavened bread. It's the reason why we don't make bread at home, because you got to put the leaven in it. You got to work it. You got to let it set, Then you got to work it. And I don't know how to make bread. Some of you do. But it takes time. I know that. And I know that I don't have time to sit there and let the leaven rise. Well, that's not fair. I probably do have time. I don't have the patience, I guess, is the way to say that. And that's kind of the point, right? That there is this patience in the kingdom of heaven being established that he's talking about. You wait for the leaven to rise. You wait for the wheat and the tares to grow together. You wait for the mustard seed to turn into the tree. And so we should have that same sort of patience and understanding about the kingdom as well. Verse 44. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who on finding one pearl of great value went and sold all that he had and bought it. So those two parables are interesting. I like to collect things, not like a bunch of the same thing. I like to have a bunch of a type of thing, right? So some of you comment on my sneakers. All that started because I got made fun of when I was playing basketball for wearing 15-year-old basketball shoes that were worn out. And so I was like, well, I got to go get new shoes so I don't get made fun of anymore by the guys, So then it's but I want to get good shoes. So then you start researching it. Well, most people that care about how they look. But I found out that there's different cushioning technology that exists, right? So it's I got to find out what the difference between Zoom Air and Max Air and React Foam and Cushlon, all these different brands, they're all basically the same thing, right? But I wanted to know. They all say they're different. I want to know what they're like. So I went down this few-year period of collecting shoes, used ones, new ones on sale, to find out what was the best, right? And then you find out that they're all the same. But as you collect all these things, right, you find the one that's worth it, right? This is the one that I like that suits my needs, but it's expensive, right? Of course, it's the expensive one. So it's how am I going to do it? Well, I'm going to sell all my other shoes, and I'm going to buy this one pair to go play basketball in. That way, I can play basketball in confidence and not be made fun of by the other guys for having old basketball shoes on, right? And then, of course, they probably make fun of you anyway because your taste is bad and you bought the ones on sale anyway that are an ugly color, but that's a whole other thing. The analogy, though, is sometimes we pursue an understanding or a collection of things. Like the guy who likes pearls. Goes around the country buying all the pearls he sees, all the pretty ones. He has this nice wide collection. Maybe he sells some of them, but he keeps the best ones back for himself, right? And then he sees the one that's worth all the others. And you know it when you see it, right? People talk about guitars this way. They have all these models of guitars, and you just got to play them all, though. I don't understand people that buy acoustic guitars online because you got to play them. You got to feel them. You got to see what they sound like. And for some reason, some guitars to some people just sound better than all the rest. And when you find that guitar, you sell all of them because that's the one that you have to have because you feel it in your bones that this is your guitar, right? That's the analogy of the treasure hidden in the field or the pearl of great price or whatever it is. You have pursued all these things your whole life, and now you have found the thing that is worth it. And you look at it and you say, I believe in God, and I believe in His promises, and I believe in His kingdom. And it doesn't matter what the cost is, this is worth it. And that's why Jesus says, fathers will bend sons, and sons, fathers, and siblings, and all those relationships are secondary to this one thing. Because it's so valuable and so important. And why is it so valuable and so important? Because of the character of God that we've already seen in some of these other parables, right? Because He is eager to save us. Because He is willing to sacrifice so much for us. And once we recognize that and see what He has done for us and see that we can, shine like the sun, then that's what we're pursuing because it's worth it. This is worth it. Because without it, we're just wandering around buying a bunch of random basketball shoes that are ugly and don't really fit that well or whatever else, right? But when you find the one that works, that's my version of a first century parable. I don't know if any of you relate to the basketball shoe analogy, but I tried. But that's the idea here. I think we're pretty much out of time. One more bell. Are we done? One more bell. 1 minute. We're going to do a parable in a minute. Verse 47. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. And when it was full, men drew it ashore and sat down and sorted the good into containers, but threw away the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angel will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Same sort of thing, right? But this time it's kind of emphasizing the net casting part rather than the tares growing. God's going to gather everyone. Everyone. The net is cast wide and far. All are called to enter, right? But then he'll have to sort through those that are able to remain and those that aren't. Many are called, few answer, right? It's just kind of the nature of the kingdom. So we didn't quite finish all these. I guess we'll try and cover those quickly before we get into chapter 14 next week. Appreciate your attention and comments.